G'day everyone, Blake here with another video, and today I want to help out some of the beginners out there. Now, there's a lot of fish at your local fish store that should be avoided for one reason or another if you are a beginner. So today I'm going to run through 8 of those and also give 8 great alternative options for you to choose instead. So let's jump straight into the video. So the first species on the list is one that takes a lot of people's attention because of the striking colours and patterns, and that's the clown loach. A beautiful fish with stripes of orange and black, but there is some things to avoid. First of all, clown loaches, they get pretty big, and the other thing is that they're a scaleless fish, which means that they are a little bit more susceptible to diseases such as ick. You have to be a little bit more careful when treating those. Whilst a beautiful fish, I definitely think they're more suited to more experienced hobbyists, and for that reason I would suggest instead pick up a few bronze corridors. Now, bronze corridors are an armoured catfish, so very much in contrast to the scaleless fish that is the clown loach. They're going to be very protected, very hardy, also very affordable and very easy to come by. They'll look really great in a school and look like mini sharks cruising along the bottom of the aquarium. They will eat some uneaten food and detritus, but more than that, they're a great community fish and a great fish for beginners to cut their teeth on. The next one I wanted to talk about is the neon tetra, actually a fish that got me into the hobby. The neon tetra are beautiful fish, and when you're getting into the hobby, it's even a bit surreal that a fish like the neon tetra with that luminescence actually exists. The trouble is that these days they're fairly poorly handled and very susceptible to a lot of diseases, so I'd probably recommend against them for the beginner hobbyist. For that reason, you can just be battling things like cottonmouth, ick, and all sorts of other deformities from the get-go. Instead, I'd recommend a larger fish, the Praecox rainbow fish or the dwarf neon rainbow fish. You still get the beautiful lush luminescent blue and red, and also some yellows on the females. You get that schooling motion, they're similarly peaceful, and they're not that big so that they'll fit in a lot of sizes of aquariums. If you do have a smaller aquarium though, I would recommend something like a white cloud or a zebradonio instead, but you won't get the same coloration as you would with the neon tetra or the dwarf neon rainbow fish. Along the topic of fish that are unfortunately prone to disease, I would suggest the fancy guppy is another one to avoid for beginners. Fancy guppies or guppies are nicknamed the million fish because there's so many of them, but there is a colour for everyone, so I find that beginners are always attracted to these fish when starting out. The trouble is that because they are in such sheer quantity, again, the handling of these fish isn't the best, and sometimes you can get some genetic issues as well, curved spines, just undesirable traits, and you'll be fighting diseases and things like that from the start. So instead, I'd recommend another fish that is really colourful, that will breed in the home aquarium, which is another thing that attracts people to guppies, the fact that they're live bearers. Well, I'd suggest platies are a great alternative. Mickey Mouse platies, red wag platies, blue platies, they will be one that will take your fancy. So yeah, they don't look exactly the same in terms of body shape, but they are packed full of colour. They will make babies for you, which is a great thing to keep new hobbyists in the fish keeping game. And they're just overall a lot more hardy. The next fish, which is again really stunning, but one to avoid for beginners, is discus. Discus are very sensitive fish. There's all sorts of issues with discus, and you need to keep them really hot. There's also a lot of deworming that's required, and just overall they're not in any way a beginner fish. Instead, I'd recommend keeping angelfish, a far more hardy fish, one that will still have that unique tall body shape and slender body shape that discus do, albeit with a few extra trailing fins. They're both cichlids and they both come from the Amazon River, and they both breed in the same way, except angelfish babies don't eat the slime coat. That's not really something that a beginner needs to be concerned about. Angelfish are far better in communities. A lot of people do have issues with aggression. I've never seen that myself, and if you are seeing those issues, I would definitely recommend keeping them in groups of 3 or more so that they can bicker amongst themselves rather than picking on any other fish that are in the aquarium. They'll also really love a planted tank, and it will help to give line of sight blocks and things like that. So I would suggest give angelfish a try, especially if you really want discus, and don't necessarily believe everything you see on the internet. I find angelfish to have a pretty good temperament, although they are still cichlids, so there's going to be a little bit of bickering and that sort of thing. Now, a lot of new beginners think, oh, I've got some algae, I know what I'll do, I'll head down to the fish store and I'll get something to eat that algae, problem solved. And the cheapest option they usually land upon is the Chinese algae eater, also sometimes labeled as sucking catfish or golden sucking catfish. But these guys are a bit of a bad idea because they get pretty big, and when they do get big, they don't really eat much algae at all. They can also enjoy eating the slime coat of fish, so they can be a bit of a terror down the track once they get big enough. They will eat a little bit of algae in the beginning, but by no means are they the best algae eater in my experience. And what I would suggest instead is actually that fish. I'd suggest going with the Siamese algae eater instead. They don't come in a gold variety, so you will have to forgo that option, but they'll be far better at eating all sorts of different algae. They will be an okay addition to the community tank. They don't really bother anything, they just cruise around doing their own thing, picking algae off plants, so what really more can you ask? If you don't really like the Siamese algae eater, you could also choose a bristlenose pleco, another great option, another armoured catfish that is going to be hardy and it's just going to do some pretty good maintenance. I would, however, recommend that don't just get a fish for the sake of being a practical algae eater. Get a fish because you like the fish. You know, some of them aren't that good at actually eating the algae, and you might find that the types of algae you have are not the ones that those particular fish are going to eat anyway. So if you like the fish, it's not a big deal. But if they're only serving that one purpose, well, it's going to be a little bit of a failure sometimes. Another one that beginners always want to pick up is the German blue ram, or the Microgeophagus ramirezi. However, these guys are also really hard to keep. When I was a beginner, I fell into this trap as well. I tried to keep them lots and lots of times. You have to keep them really hot, and I find that at least the captive population in Australia isn't all that strong genetically. So I'd instead recommend going with the crebensis. Crebensis are also a dwarf cichlid, but they come from West Africa instead, but they'll have a similar sort of behaviour. They'll also live in a similar sort of water, and you can definitely put crebensis in a community tank. So I just find that crebensis offer the same sort of coloration, maybe a little bit less spangling, but they're a lot more adaptable, a lot more hardy, and they'll give you sort of the same behaviour as the German blue ram, without all the hassle. Now, it probably has to be the most common fish that is purchased for a beginner, and that is the fancy goldfish. But again, really prone to issues. A lot of them have spinal issues, internal organ issues as well as they grow, just because of the way that they've been bred over a long period of time. Now, I feel like most people pick up fancy goldfish to have one fish in a tank, in a living space, or maybe on a desk or something like that. And I think there is a fish that is perfect for that, and that's the Betta fish. Now, Betta will require a heater, which goldfish don't, but I find that fancy goldfish actually do enjoy a little bit of heat anyway. As well as that, make sure you have a filter, but don't give them too much flow. And Bettas can be that great sort of, that pet that your kids can really enjoy and get to know and have fun interacting with. They're going to be a lot more comfortable in the smaller quarters. They're going to be a lot less susceptible to issues like swim bladder issues and things like that. And because they're an anabentoid, which means they draw oxygen from the surface, they are a little bit more forgiving when it comes to water parameters. Again, they come in all sorts of fin shapes and colours, and they will be a Betta for you, and it can be a fun family experience to go and pick out the perfect Betta to go in that aquarium. As always, please just don't keep them in small cups or unheated jars and things like that. Don't buy into the narrative that they live in puddles, so let's keep them in a puddle. We can do better than that, and I think it shows with the behaviour of the fish. We've all seen Bettas in those cups in stores, sort of just barely hanging on for dear life. So make sure that you put them in an appropriate tank with appropriate conditions, and they'll really pay you back for that. And the last one on my list is umboona, which is a huge range of fish, but things like yellow labs, demisoni, cobalt blues, all those sort of African cichlids from Lake Malawi. Really beautiful colour, however the trouble with keeping umboona is that they're quite aggressive, and to keep them appropriately you need to overstock the tank. And overstocking is just something I would never recommend to a beginner because it can be a little bit tricky when it comes to making sure there's no ammonia issues, bacterial blooms, or other things like that. And instead, I'd recommend keeping a different African cichlid, the Neolephrologus multifasciatus, a shell dweller. And whilst the shell dwellers won't give you the same coloration of the umboona, I do think that they make up for it with their behavior. They'll spend all day excavating and moving around the whole tank, far less aggressive, and they'll also breed within the tank as a community as well. So this can be a really great experience for beginners, and I believe far more enjoyable than sort of dealing with fish bashing each other up constantly in a display tank. And they'll give that good depth of experience that beginners need without all the fish loss and any unnecessary issues that come with that level of aggression that umboona have. So there you go guys, that was 8 fish that I think beginners should avoid and some alternatives to those. I will just say before I close out the video, I know a lot of people will probably think Oscars, and I actually think Oscars are an okay fish for beginners so long as they have an appropriate tank. I have said this in a previous video all about Oscars, but if a beginner has a 75 gallon or above or a 4 foot by 18 inch aquarium, then I have no issue recommending an Oscar to them, just so long as they can keep up with the waste that they do create. Other than that guys, hopefully you found this video to be enjoyable. If you've got a beginner that is looking to get into the hobby, feel free to share this video with them, it'll really help me out. If you did like the video, it always helps me out too. Smash like, hit subscribe, and all that fun stuff. And other than that, I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.